Beverly Hills, California. The Beverly Hills Hotel, Polo Lounge, March 22nd, 1977. Tuesday afternoon, 2:15 p.m. The restaurant hums with the quiet conversations of Hollywood power players conducting business over overpriced salads and mineral water. At table 12, near the window overlooking the pool, sits a meeting that will haunt Christopher Walken for the rest of his life. Across from him is George Lucas, the young director who shocked the industry with American Graffiti 4 years earlier. Lucas appears nervous, excited, almost desperate, as he pitches what he describes as the most ambitious science fiction film ever conceived. He's talking about spaceships and laser swords, mystical forces, and galactic empire. He's describing a character named Han Solo, a roguish smuggler who becomes an unlikely hero. Christopher Walken listens politely, but internally he's thinking this is the most ridiculous project he's ever heard pitched. Science fiction is for children and B-movie theaters. Serious actors build careers on meaningful drama, not space adventures with robots and aliens. Why would he risk his growing reputation on something so obviously commercial and shallow? In 30 minutes, Christopher Walken will make the decision that cost him $50 million, global superstardom, and a place in cinema legend. He will turn down Han Solo, the role that will make Harrison Ford one of the biggest movie stars in the world. For 46 years afterward, he will wonder what his life would have been like if he had said yes instead of no. The story begins 6 weeks earlier in George Lucas's cramped office at 20th Century Fox. The young director has just completed the script for Star Wars, and he knows the film's success depends entirely on perfect casting. The studio is skeptical about the project. Science fiction doesn't sell tickets. Space movies are considered box office poison since the failure of expensive productions like Silent Running. If Star Wars fails, it could end Lucas's career before it really began. The character of Han Solo is crucial to his vision. Lucas needs someone who can be charming but dangerous, roguish but ultimately heroic. Someone who can deliver lines like "never tell me the odds" with enough conviction to make audiences believe in a cynical smuggler's transformation into a reluctant hero. Lucas makes a list of potential actors, and Christopher Walken's name appears near the top. In early 1977, Walken is 34 years old and perfectly positioned for a major breakthrough. His unsettling performance as Diane Keaton's disturbed brother in Annie Hall has critics talking. Here's an actor who can be simultaneously charming and menacing, attractive and uncomfortable to watch. Lucas sees Han Solo as a character requiring that same duality, appealing enough to win Princess Leia's heart, dangerous enough to be believable as an outlaw, vulnerable enough to make his eventual heroism emotionally satisfying. Christopher Walken possesses all these qualities naturally, but there's a fundamental problem. Christopher Walken doesn't respect George Lucas or his project. When Lucas's assistant calls Walken's agent to request a meeting, Walken's immediate reaction is dismissive. Science fiction? He asks his representative, Ellen Stern. Like Flash Gordon serials? That's not serious filmmaking. Ellen tries to convince him to at least take the meeting. George Lucas is talented, she argues. American Graffiti was a huge success both critically and commercially, and they're offering significant money. But money isn't Christopher Walken's primary motivation in 1977. He's focused on building credibility as a dramatic actor. He's spent 15 years grinding away in New York theater, finally gaining recognition for his psychological intensity and unique screen presence. Why would he jeopardize that reputation on a space adventure that sounds like a children's television show? "I'm trying to establish myself as a serious artist," he tells Ellen. "This sounds like a career killer." Ellen eventually persuades him to take the meeting as a professional courtesy. Walken agrees to hear Lucas out, but he's already decided he's not interested in starring in what sounds like an expensive episode of Buck Rogers. Which brings us back to the Polo Lounge, where George Lucas is about to experience one of the most frustrating afternoons of his professional life. Lucas is passionate about his vision, describing the Star Wars universe with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believes he's creating something revolutionary. He explains the Force, the Empire, the Rebellion. He talks about a galaxy far, far away where good and evil battle across the stars in a conflict that mirrors classical mythology. Christopher Walken nods politely, but his body language communicates complete disengagement. He orders another coffee, glances at his watch, responds with non-committal phrases that make it clear he's not taking any of this seriously. The character of Han Solo, Lucas explains desperately, is the emotional heart of the story. He starts as a cynic who only cares about money, but through his friendship with Luke and his love for Leia, he becomes someone willing to sacrifice everything for others. It's a classic redemption arc set against an epic backdrop. Walken responds with a slight nod that suggests he finds the concept moderately interesting but hardly compelling. Lucas pulls out Ralph McQuarrie's concept art, stunning paintings of the Millennium Falcon, Star Destroyers, lightsaber duels. These images will define science fiction aesthetics for generations, but to Christopher Walken they look like elaborate illustrations from a comic book. "We're planning featuring the largest budget for special effects in film history, Lucas continues. This could revolutionize how movies are made, how stories are told on screen. Walken replies, the kind of sound that indicates polite attention without genuine interest. The conversation continues for 20 more minutes, with Lucas becoming increasingly desperate and Walken becoming increasingly detached. Finally, Lucas makes his formal offer, the words that will echo in Walken's mind for the rest of his life. Christopher, I'd like you to play Han Solo. The studio is offering $500,000 up front, plus a percentage of profit. If the film succeeds, you could make millions. Christopher Walken takes a sip of his coffee and delivers the response that will define his biggest professional regret. I appreciate the offer, George, but science fiction really isn't my thing. I'm looking for more substantial material. George Lucas sits in stunned silence. In all his preparation for this meeting, he never seriously considered the possibility that Christopher Walken would simply refuse. The money is excellent. The role is substantial. This could be a career-defining opportunity. Why would any actor turn this down without even reading the script? Would you consider reading the full screenplay? Lucas asks. Maybe spending some time thinking about it? I don't think that's necessary, Walken replies, but I appreciate you thinking of me for the project. The meeting ends awkwardly. Lucas pays for lunch and watches Christopher Walken walk away, probably forever. He's back to the beginning, looking for an actor who can bring Han Solo to life. 2 weeks later, Harrison Ford auditions for the role. He's not even supposed to be reading for parts. He's there as a favor to Lucas, reading lines with other actors to help with the casting process. Ford has been working as a carpenter, building cabinets for Lucas's house. But something about his natural charisma, his effortless cool, his ability to make even the most outrageous dialogue sound believable, convinces Lucas he's found his smuggler. Star Wars is released on May 25th, 1977, exactly 2 months after Christopher Walken turns down Han Solo. The film becomes more than a hit. It becomes a cultural phenomenon that redefines entertainment. Lines around the block, sold out theaters for months, merchandising deals worth hundreds of millions. Harrison Ford, the unknown carpenter turned actor, becomes one of the biggest movie stars in the world, virtually overnight. The role Christopher Walken dismissed as beneath him becomes the foundation of Ford's 45-year career as a leading man. But the real tragedy for Walken isn't just missing the fame and fortune. Star Wars doesn't just succeed commercially. It's recognized as a masterpiece. The film receives 7 Academy Awards and is preserved in the National Film Registry. Critics and scholars acknowledge it as one of the most important films in cinema history. Meanwhile, Christopher Walken spends 1,977 preparing for The Deer Hunter, the role that will win him an Oscar but will also put him through psychological hell and establish him as a serious dramatic actor specializing in intense, often disturbed characters. The contrast is painful. Harrison Ford gets to be a charming leading man in one of the most beloved films ever made. Christopher Walken gets to play a traumatized veteran in one of the most emotionally devastating films ever made. Both are great performances, but only one leads to mainstream stardom and audience affection. Over the following years, as Star Wars becomes a trilogy and Harrison Ford becomes a household name, Christopher Walken watches from the sidelines and contemplates what might have been. The profit percentage he turned down would have been worth over $50 million by the time Return of the Jedi is released. But the financial loss pales compared to the creative opportunities he missed. Imagine Christopher Walken's distinctive voice delivering Han Solo's most famous lines. Picture his unique intensity applied to the smuggler's transformation, from selfish cynic to heroic leader. Consider how his natural menace would have made Han's outlaw background more credible, or how his unexpected vulnerability would have enriched the character's romantic storyline. It would have been a completely different interpretation from Harrison Ford's performance, but it might have been equally memorable. In interviews years later, Christopher Walken is surprisingly candid about his regret. I made a mistake, he admits, without hesitation. I underestimated what George was creating. I thought it was just another science fiction movie, but it was something much more significant. That taught me never to judge a project by its genre. The regret goes deeper than missing fame and fortune. Christopher Walken realizes that turning down Star Wars fundamentally altered his career trajectory. Instead of becoming a leading man capable of moving between genres, he became known primarily for playing intense, often villainous characters. Instead of charming audiences, he built a career on making them slightly uncomfortable. This isn't necessarily negative. Christopher Walken's work as a character actor has been extraordinary, creating memorable performances in Pulp Fiction, Batman Returns, Catch Me If You Can, and dozens of other films. But it represents a different kind of success from what he might have achieved as Han Solo. The alternate timeline is almost too intriguing to contemplate. Christopher Walken as the face of Star Wars, starring opposite Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill, Walken piloting the Millennium Falcon, bantering with Chewbacca, facing down Darth Vader, Vader, Walken becoming synonymous with one of the most successful film franchises in history. Instead of being known for psychological intensity, he would have been known for roguish charm. Instead of being a cult figure beloved by film enthusiasts, he would have been a mainstream icon beloved by everyone. Instead of dancing in music videos as a career second act, he would have been famous for saving the galaxy. The ripple effects would have been enormous. Different roles throughout the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, different career opportunities, different public persona. Perhaps he still becomes a great actor, but he becomes a different kind of great actor. Christopher Walken's rejection of Han Solo becomes a cautionary tale about making career decisions based on preconceptions rather than possibility. He dismissed Star Wars as juvenile science fiction without considering that genre films can be just as artistically valid as serious dramas. The lesson extends beyond Hollywood into broader life choices. Sometimes the opportunities that seem least appealing on the surface turn out to be the most transformative. Sometimes the projects we're too proud to consider become the ones that define entire industries. I learned not to be a snob about material, Walken reflects in later interviews. Good acting is good acting, whether you're playing Hamlet or a space smuggler. The quality of the work depends on the commitment of the people involved, not the respectability of the subject matter. 30 minutes in, the Polo Lounge changed the entire trajectory of Christopher Walken's career. A brief conversation where he said no instead of yes, where he chose artistic pride over creative risk, where he underestimated a young director's vision. Harrison Ford has said that playing Han Solo was like winning the lottery. Christopher Walken had the winning ticket in his hand and threw it away because he thought lotteries were beneath him. That's the story of Christopher Walken's biggest mistake. Not just a missed opportunity, but a reminder that sometimes the most important choices are the ones we make without realizing their significance until much later. Sometimes when someone offers you the chance to save the galaxy, you should say yes, even if you think it's just science fiction. The decision to turn down Han Solo continues to influence Christopher Walken's career choices for decades afterward. Having learned the painful lesson of dismissing projects based on genre rather than quality, he begins accepting roles that other serious actors might consider beneath them. This shift in perspective leads to some of his most memorable performances. When Tim Burton offers him the villain role in Batman Returns, Walken doesn't hesitate despite the comic book source material. When Quentin Tarantino wants him for Pulp Fiction, he says yes immediately, understanding that working with innovative directors matters more than the respectability of the project. But the what-if scenarios continue to fascinate him. In quiet moments at his Connecticut farmhouse, does he ever imagine himself delivering Han Solo's most famous lines? "I love you. I know." Spoken in that distinctive Christopher Walken cadence, the exchange would have had completely different emotional resonance. Friends and colleagues notice that Walken never speaks bitterly about missing Star Wars. Instead, he treats it as a valuable lesson about the unpredictability of the entertainment industry. You never know which conversation is going to change your life, he tells young actors. So you better pay attention to all of them. When The Force Awakens is released in 2015, bringing Han Solo back to screens after 30 years, Christopher Walken watches Harrison Ford reprise the role and experiences a complex mixture of emotions. Admiration for Ford's performance, curiosity about how he might have approached the older Han Solo, and a lingering trace of wistful regret. "Harrison did something I never could have done," Walken admits in a rare interview about the subject. "He made Han Solo feel effortless, like he was just being himself. I would have brought too much intensity to it. Maybe it worked out the way it was supposed to." This gracious perspective masks the deeper truth that Christopher Walken's rejection of Han Solo represents one of Hollywood's greatest sliding doors moments. A single conversation where different choices could have reshaped not just individual careers, but the entire cultural landscape. 30 minutes in the Beverly Hills Hotel changed everything. Not just for Christopher Walken, but for Harrison Ford, George Lucas, and millions of fans who fell in love with a very different version of Han Solo than the one Walken might have created. The lesson remains: when someone offers you the chance to join something potentially revolutionary, you should probably say yes. You might not get another opportunity to save the galaxy.